Hello, my name is Angie Juzang, and I am on the board of the Legacy Business League. And we are here today because the origin of our organization literally is to maintain the legacy of those who've gone before us. And we didn't want the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday to go by without reflecting and honoring his legacy and talking a little bit about his life and work. And today we have some wonderful panelists that are joining us, and some speakers, experts that I've just met, Miss Nsombi Lambright Haynes, but many of you have seen LaShaundra McCarty because she has been intimately involved with Legacy Business League from the very beginning. And so we're very happy to have her today. So I'll give you a brief bio of both of them. Ms. Nsombi Lambright Haynes is the Executive Director of One Voice, a leadership and policy advocacy organization. The goal of the organization is to address structural oppression. Those are key words in areas such as the public education inequities, the voting rights, the environment, and the criminal justice system. And LaShaundra, again, she's a board member of Legacy Business League. She's a motivational speaker. She's a coach. She is a mentor to me in the marketing world, and I find her to be a bit of a guru and very inspirational. And she's ordained with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And that is significant in some of the questions that I'm going to be posing a little later. So thank you for being here today with us to honor Dr. King and to make sure that we take a moment to reflect on his mission. So I'll start with you, Ms. Nsombi. I would love for you to tell me a little bit about One Voice and the work that you're doing. And if you want to draw a parallel to how the work really supports Dr. King's legacy, you're welcome to.
Okay, thank you so much for having me this evening. I think it's very important for us to always have these conversations around the King holiday so that we can reflect on his legacy and the legacy of the civil rights movement and its significant impact on the state. So, thank you for having this important discussion. I have been very proud to work for One Voice for the past almost 10 years. And I started out as a board member of One Voice and joined the staff in 2012 and then became executive director in 2016. And One Voice is a leadership development and advocacy organization that focuses on some of those same policy issues that we knew were significant back during the civil rights movement, but are still significant today, like the public education system, like the criminal justice system, which has quadrupled, and the United States has the largest incarceration rate in the world right now. And also looking at environmental justice, which mostly affects poor and Black communities, and looking at voting rights. This is something that we knew was very significant when we did not have the right to vote during the 60s. And now we see acts of suppression for voting rights now. We have a voter protection hotline where we receive calls from citizens that, talk about what's happening to them at the polling places. I went to vote last year with no problem, but all of a sudden my name was purged off of the roll this year and I
Mm.
was not allowed to vote. So these are, some of those same battles that we saw 40 years ago. And our work is about looking at policy reform and looking at how policies can address some of these injustices.
Mhm.
But we also look at leadership development and making sure that people are equipped in their local communities to change some of these policies at the local and state level.
Okay, thank you for that description. And let's talk a little bit about the policy reform piece of it. Dr. King led orchestrated efforts to impact policy, first by making a lot of noise around issues, right? So a lot of people think, what we learned when we were younger is that Rosa Parks, she got tired, took her shoes off, she just sat down, and the initiative and movement that happened after that was somehow reactionary to learning about that in some arbitrary way when it was actually planned. They knew that there was a possibility that if she were to break the law, in what she did, that she could be arrested. And once she was arrested, they had very systematic things that they followed up on. And so one of the things that we have a tendency to forget are the operations behind Dr. King's movement, in addition to even local civil rights leaders. As y'all know, Dr. Mason was my father, and he called many of his initiatives operations, whether it was showing up to lunch counters or to places where they knew there was segregation. They deployed one another's, communicated with one another. Hey, this person's not letting us in today. And then, or I might get arrested. So show up with bail money at the jail. Those are the same type of things, obviously, that were simultaneously going on in other parts of the country, but Dr. King were leading. So the working through policy reform, because so many of what he did resulted in the changing of laws. And so talk to us a little bit why that's so important, because again, we can march all day long, we can, hold picket signs, but in the event we don't use our voices or our tactics or our legislatures to actually change the policies, where would we be? So what are some policies that you feel like you've impacted, and why is it so important to work through those means?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it takes a coordinated strategy. And that's also one of the lessons from Dr. King and from the civil rights movement. In King's letter from the Birmingham jail, he talks about community organizing being this four-step approach of negotiation, demonstration, and making sure that you have all the information you need for the people. So he talks about all of these different steps being necessary to make sure that you have victory in whatever injustice that you're fighting. And so that's also how we attempt to operate. Policy is very important at the state and local level, but without people who these policies are directly impacting, being informed about the policy and understanding it, policy means nothing. It becomes another law on the book that no one understands. And I'll just give one example. A few years ago, we started advocating for criminal justice reform at the state level in terms of sentencing reform, because of course, Mississippi at that time was number 2 in the United States for incarceration. I think we're getting better. We're number 3 now, but still, the highest incarcerators in the country. And so at that time, a bill passed, House Bill 585, that said, hey, these people, if they've served 50% of their time, they're eligible for parole, but they have to file these papers. That bill, that law was actually passed and signed into law. That law sat on the shelves for so many years. It was so hard for people to actually write their attorneys or get legal representation to get them out of jail, because it was a law that was passed, but it had no meat on the bones. And so policy without people is meaningless.
That's
But we definitely have to look at how these laws and policies impact our everyday lives. And then we have to have people that understand them and who can educate others about them so that they can really make sense to us.
and that is a note that I just made to myself. How do we go about educating ourselves? What are some of the resources that we can use to help impact decisions or put pressure on individuals that can pass the policies? What is the best way to educate ourselves?
Yeah, I've talked to people about this all the time because, it's something that I do in I'm blessed enough to have a job where I can do this work every day. And it is a blessing, and I consider it a privilege, right? There are some people who have to get up and go to a factory job every day and then come home and say, well, I want to do some organizing work, or I want to understand policy more. And they don't have the opportunity to sit around and read stuff all day like I do. But what I tell people is to just really kind of understand where they're able to enter the policy discussion. If you're able to go to your city council and school board meetings, um, do that. Sit in on those meetings and take notes. Everyone doesn't have the time to do that. And of course, a lot of these meetings are virtual now. If you have time to go to your state capitol, go to your state capitol and sit in on some of the committee meetings. Sit in when the Senate and the House of Representatives are actually, talking about legislation. And you can also find that online as well. But for people who still don't have the time to do that, because some people are, you know, they're working 12-hour days, they don't have time to sit in a meeting. Um, Go to your church and have those conversations with small groups about policy. What are some policy concerns in your neighborhood? Do you have potholes on your street that you want to impact? So take it from wherever you can. It's a small step. Some people think, oh, I have to do all of this work. I have to go to every city council meeting, or I just can't get involved. No, it's as simple as being involved in your neighborhood association, being involved in your child's PTA at school. That's policy.
Wow.
Just being involved where you can.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And when you break it down that way, it seems not as overwhelming. That you can really make an impact in your sphere of influence. So, Ms. LaShaundra, one of the things that Dr. King wanted to highlight and was really had a platform on is, obviously jobs. And so the March on Washington that is well known in 1963, that is now kind of referred to as the I Have a Dream speech. It was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And during that speech, he says this: I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. So he could have called out Alabama, a place that he lived and administered and was discriminated against. He could have talked about Georgia, Louisiana, Florida, any of the southern states, but he called out Mississippi specifically. We have chosen to live here, to work here, to raise our families here. Talk to me a little bit about, how you feel Mississippi may have evolved since that time. Like if we were to have a March on Washington right now and he was alive, would he still call out Mississippi, even with having changed the flag? And how do you feel about the fact that we live here, we've chosen to live here, we still have some way to go? In 1963, he called us out, and is it something, have we evolved in a way that maybe he would give us a pass today?
Possibly. I mean, we definitely aren't where we were in 1963, thank God. And during that time, Mississippi was a state that was fighting, it seemed to be the hardest against actually progressing and integrating, and for people to have votes and just to have their voices be heard, or to be able to have businesses in their communities and not be hindered. Unfortunately, there are some pockets in this state where people still struggle for just the basics, and they're not asking for a handout or to take something from somebody else, but just the opportunity to thrive in their own communities. And that isn't something that people should even have to fight for. That should be an automatic if they're making efforts, that there aren't people putting up barriers, and we know that they are. We have changed the flag. I don't think that changing the flag alone is going to solve our issues. And Mississippi does have some issues. But remember, even in the changing of the flag, there were people who were still holding on. There were those who protested that, who felt like it was taking away a piece of their own identity, even if it meant that the emblem that was currently there was a symbol of hate and oppression for somebody else. And a part of it is that we, outside of the African American community, can we look at the white community and the other communities of this state and say that we are a we together? And a lot of times we cannot say that. And that's unfortunate, because a lot of the issues that you will see cut across the communities are the same. Toward the end of Martin Luther King's ministry, he was really looking at the poor in general. And there are a lot of poor people in Mississippi. And instead of coming together and saying, well, we're going to fight this issue of poverty, or we're going to fight this particular policy so that we can actually make some inroads, people are still fighting along race lines when their core human issues are actually the same. A poor white person, a poor Black person, both want good education for their kids. They both want access to good jobs. They both want to be able to go to the doctor and that bill not kill them later. And yet we are still fighting over these menial things. But as long as people continue to fight, they don't make strides toward actually changing, because they're fighting for crumbs as opposed to looking at the bigger piece of the puzzle and saying, what about this system keeps us in this position? And that goes to what Nsombi was saying about people being educated, because they are very uneducated about even the process of government and how things run and who does what. And while we're looking at each other and fighting, things are continuing to go as they were, and nothing in people's individual lives is actually changing. Mississippi has some wonderful attributes. We have great people here. They're really warm people here, but we have some systems that do need to be changed. And I don't know if he would call us out the way that he did then. But I will say there is work to do. And I do believe that there's a next generation that has stepped up that is willing to continue that work.
I think so too. Thank you for saying that. I want to stay on the course of what you talked about in terms of socioeconomic disparities and the commonalities that we have amongst races as it pertains to economic disparities. That, you know, if what he was trying to do, like you said, with the Poor People's Campaign toward the end of his life, was to shed light on the fact that the hierarchy as it pertains to, you know, the economics within our society, and that if we could overcome the barriers of racism, that, you know, Black, white, Latino people who might not have the same means as those who are richer, for lack of a better terminology, that we could have a stronger voice if we came together. And in his movement, he did have quite a lot, I shouldn't say a few, a lot, Caucasian brothers and sisters that helped him in the movement. And they made a concerted effort to get involved after very specific incidents, such as the bombing at his home and the assassination of Medgar Evers. And they mobilized in a way that they were taking paying more attention to the plight of African Americans. I think all of us, and I say us, but I wasn't alive at that time, there was a generation that did kind of took what they got and got a little bit complacent, and, you know, that they had a little piece of the American dream. I think there's some people that would admit to that, but with still fighting in a way that's still a consciousness, knowing that there was discrimination in our world and in our community, but still kind of went along to get along, both Black and white. But most recently, as you know, after George Floyd's murder, there was a consciousness about the Black experience that awakened individuals in the white community. Other than the obvious of seeing someone murdered on national television, why do you think that particular incident awakened the white community in a way that it hasn't done before? Because we know that Black folks have been shot by white cops before, and when we saw Eric Garner murdered. I can't breathe. So what do you think happened in 2020 in that particular incident that awakened people to become anti-racist? and to join our voice once again in a very strong and concerted way.
I think we were already at a tipping point. If we just look at the George Floyd incident in and of itself, yes, there were people that we knew had been shot before, but there was a different level of intimacy. Like, we heard about Trayvon. You know, we saw that a quick clip of Tamir. But with George, it lasted so long. And there was no way to excuse any of it. You know, in other instances, they would say, oh, well, there was a gun in the car, or, oh, he did something threatening. I mean, this man was not doing anything that could have even been construed as being threatening. And to watch it last forever and for nobody to step in, I think it was just all these pieces. And I think that for some people, it's, well, if there's one bad cop, then another cop will stop that cop's action, right? That's what you would think.
Yeah.
But in the video, you can see the other cops not even push the cop off so this man can breathe as he is begging for his mother. I think there were just so many components of it. And I do think that length was one of it. I think that the perception that people had that cops would self-correct, that did not happen, was lifted up like, okay, wait a minute, we really have a problem here. And then as citizens were trying to intervene, they're being threatened. Yes. And I think that all of those pieces came into play. And, you know, you can't ignore the fact that because of the pandemic, there were just so many more eyes on it. Mm-hmm. And even though I'm not always a super fan of media, this was probably one of the instances where it being played over and over again and people having to wrestle with it, as opposed to it being a click, very quick story and it's only 30 seconds and then we move on. People had to sit with the uncomfortable nature of it. And then the question began, how do we even get here? And well, I think white people start to say, I support the police, but I cannot support that. That is what they are talking about. And we could not run away from the conversations because COVID made a lot of people just sit down. And one of the benefits probably of social media is that people started to share how they felt. And I included, like, this is what concerns me with having an 18-year-old bonus son who is over 6 feet tall, going off to college by himself, not in a community where a lot of people know me and my husband and can say, okay, he's theirs. So the layer of protection gone. And people may not value his life just because of what he looks like. And I think a lot of people started to share what it means to be Black in America and some of the fear that we have that shouldn't even have to exist.
And I hope for the white folks that contacted me during that time and said, what can I do? I'm ready to listen. We stood up some listening sessions so we could educate that they continue a legacy of listening and openness and just allowing their humanity to shine through. Because I think that's what happened. I think that a lot of times we put our head down in the sand and we just don't want to recognize, we don't want to get involved. That's not my problem. But to your point, it lasted forever. And anybody who has a heart or who has any type of empathy would look at that and want to do better. And so for those who, are engaged even in Legacy Business League, we appreciate the fact that you tune in so you can listen and learn and incorporate inclusion into your workplace and into your family and continue the conversation. So one of the things that
can I just real quickly on that one?
Sure. Yeah.
something this police brutality issue just burns me up. I think one other thing that's really important about the George Floyd incident is that I believe that this may have been the first time that a police department stood up on day one and said all of these officers are fired. They
Okay.
didn't say we're going to wait and investigate. They didn't say at home leave with pay until we gather all the facts. And
Mhm.
like you said, LaShaundra, all of a sudden a gun was found, or this was found, or this happened in the past. No, they took very swift action and said these guys are fired. Now, all of them did not end up getting prosecuted. So, we still have a lot of work to do in that area. But I think that the fact that the police department separated itself from those officers who are part of that act immediately also gave other folks who had been reluctant in the past because you have thought they didn't have all the facts. It gave them that avenue to say, okay, this is what they've been talking about all along.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Mhm.
I want to stay with you and talk a little bit about the Dr. King, formalized an organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You worked for the ACLU. There are other organizations and leaders in our community now and throughout the years. They use their power and influence through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. 60 Black churches. They conducted nonviolent protests for civil rights reform, and they harnessed that moral authority, right? Do you feel like we have the leadership and/or the organizations now to make the same type of impact in a formal, very consorted, orchestrated way?
Yeah, I do. There are a lot of organizations. SCLC is still around. We have organizations like the NAACP, the Urban League on the national scale. There are also a bunch of statewide organizations like ours that are doing similar type of work. There are organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center that challenge some of these injustices through the legal system. So I do think that there are a lot of organizations that are doing social justice work right now. I think that what we need to do a better job of is coming together with a clear agenda for moving forward. And you see some of that in some ways, for instance, in the area of criminal justice reform around the nation. We've made strides. We have a long way to go in Mississippi, but around the nations, we've made strides because people have come together with both so-called liberal and conservative organizations and said, we're spending too much money on a criminal justice system that doesn't keep families safe. So we have invested all this money in locking people up, and we still have crime. People are still breaking in houses. So obviously, spending all this money on a broken system is like throwing money down the drain. So I think that we need to do more of that coming together to develop those clear agendas in changing policy at the regional level, at the national level, of course, then the regional level, and then the state level, because we know what happens in Alabama is going to happen in Mississippi next. It's going to happen in Louisiana. And so if we were able to come together more to talk about these issues and develop a clear strategy with personal agendas to the side and not worrying about who gets the credit.
Yes, yes.
Also one of the things, just in reading about Dr. King's legacy, that's also one of the things that we had to deal with back then, because Dr. King was not the one that was leading a lot of the work during the civil rights movement, but he was the most eloquent one. He was a leader. People listened to him. When he grabbed the mic, people knew something was about to go down, but he certainly wasn't the only one working. So those are just some lessons, to learn for in terms of how we collaborate to get things done.
Well, you know what? I should have asked you too. Do you think you would have called us out now if you were given the same speech? when he
Oh,
called
yeah.
Mississippi out?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Our schools are still segregated, for the most part. And when we look at segregation now, segregated schools now, we look at the way that schools are funded based on the zip code that you live in is total a total human rights violation. So in housing and then the list goes on and on.
Mhm.
Criminal justice system. So yeah, I think he would still call out Mississippi. He would say, "Hey, that's great on that flag, but you have a long way to go."
Long way to go. Okay. Um, Now, he began his ministry formally at 25. He was a pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And when I first talked about doing this legacy talks, I was saying, well, maybe we'll talk about his ministry. Well, maybe we'll talk about the civil rights movement. And one of the other board members said his ministry was his work. His work was his ministry. There was a quote that he's a theologian of great prophetic vision, could cast vision and really make it happen. So let's talk about two different things as we begin to wind down here. LaShaundra, if you would address the ministry as it pertains to civil rights work and vice versa.
Well, ministry in the broadest term is serving God's people. And a lot of people seem to think that if God calls them, they have to go into pastoral ministry. They have to be standing in the pulpit on a Sunday morning. But there's so much more to ministry than that. And God is not confined to just a building. If we believe that God is omnipresent, meaning that God is everywhere, then ministry is everywhere. And if you believe that the Holy Spirit indwells wherever you are, is the presence of God. So we have to stop limiting ministry to just one space. And when you do that, you open yourself up to the fact that there is community outside of the doors of the church. And that community typically stands in great need, whether it is spiritual or social. But the fact of the matter is, if a person is having issues with school system for their kids or access to healthcare or the ability to get a job, that impacts who they are as a person. So you can't just give somebody some scripture and say, I'm going to pray with you, and walk away from them as if they have these other needs have just fallen aside because you said a prayer.
Oh, wow.
No, it's faith and works, but we also live in community. So you don't take off who you are. If you are clergy, just because you're not in a church pastoring doesn't mean that when you walk into another position that you become somebody else. You should not, because that means that you're really not living authentic to your faith. There are people in ministry who work for nonprofits. There are some who sit in government positions. There are some who work in the marketplace. Who you are is who you are. And your light should be reflected in whatever space you're actually in. And you should be there not just for the sake of your benefit and drawing a check, but for the sake of somebody else, even if you don't work inside of a quote unquote ministry, even if church is not where you dwell and where you serve and utilize your gifts. And that demarcation is really cheating the people that you could impact by God having placed you in the space that you're in.
But he was truly a vessel for God. He was, you agree that his work was his ministry, because you just described that eloquently, and that even though he was able to find that balance of using the church, because we know that the church was a hub for meetings, for gatherings, for information, for that community. I think he had words that people could relate to, regardless if they were following him as a minister, and that, I think that was his appeal in so many ways. And do we want to just address the role of the Black church today? Just in general, do you find that it is as influential, and if not, why not?
I think there are some that are, and it really depends. because typically Black churches are very solo leader oriented. So like the pastor's going that way, the church is going that way. And there are some pastors who are socially justice minded, who do understand the intersections between their faith and justice work, and justice is mentioned in the Bible. It's not just a secular word. And they realize that and know that they are ministering to the whole person. And so they include these conversations. One of my mentor pastors used to say that, you read the Bible, you read the newspaper, because we are living in the context of a world. We're not just living in, where the Bible was centuries ago. And so I do think that the church in a lot of ways is still the hub. And I think that people are welcome and open to that. And there are some ministries that decide they're not going to take that on at all. And then there are others that are bursting at the seams because they are intersecting across people's lives. I mean, when you look at Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is a fellow disciples minister, I visited his church before Poor People's Campaign had even become a thing. And pastoring on Sunday morning, down the street, they had a community center for the kids where they were doing tutoring and had a library. They also had a senior center for the elderly, a residential center for the elderly. So he was already doing these other components of the work because he was trying to meet the needs of the people, not just in his church, but in his community. And now, we see that he has kind of rebirthed the Poor People's Campaign and ended up branching out to even Appalachia. So you have people in Appalachia becoming NAACP members because they see that there's truth in the message, there's love in the message, and that regardless of what they look like, there is room for them at the table. And so I do think that the church is still massively vital, but in some communities underutilized.
That makes sense. Okay, we're going to close it out with one last question to both of you. Why do you feel like maintaining Dr. King's legacy is important to this generation? And or how do you feel like we can continue to remember him? Ms. Nsombi?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to continue to study Dr. King, and not just the "I have a dream" speech, but study what he was doing before he died in those very critical days when he was starting the Poor People's Campaign, and they were about to march on Washington again with a Poor People's March. And just to imagine where that work would be, had he survived. And the fact that he was in Memphis to join in solidarity with sanitation workers who were talking about living wages. So that was the direction, that his ministry was going in. So I think we definitely need to continue to have those very important conversations about Dr. King's work and the work of all of the leaders around him that really made all of these important and significant policy changes possible at the national level and the statewide level. We need to talk about his work in the context of the passage of the Voting Rights Act, the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And so all of those things happened at very critical times during the civil rights movement. And it wasn't just Dr. King, but there were a lot of people. There were a lot of people here in Mississippi, all of the Fannie Lou Hamers and Hollis Watkins, who made a lot of that work possible with their blood, sweat, and tears. So we definitely need to keep having that conversation. And we definitely need to talk about it in the context of what's happening right now, because we're still talking about a livable wage. We're still talking about inadequate housing. We're still talking about inadequate public schools, criminal justice system. The list goes on and on. And we've come a long way, but we have a lot of work to do to come together and improve these systems for our future generations.
Fantastic. All right, LaShaundra, bring us home.
I totally agree. I was going to say, like, we're having the same conversations. I think one of the things that is different is that many of us are in better positions and in more positions of power to be able to bring about some of these changes. So my closing would be to appeal to those who feel like they want to be a part and just don't know how. Get involved with your local community, get involved with your local government. Don't close any of those doors. A lot of people assume that, oh, okay, they're not going to listen to me. But how do you know if you never have that conversation? And there are people who are willing to listen and build up the community together. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it alone. Dr. King's work is definitely vital. It's vital for us to keep talking about it. One, so that we can really, I think it makes us stop and focus on where we were and evaluate where we have come. And it doesn't mean that we just celebrate and put our hands down and go, oh, okay, well, it's not like it was then. But I think that people need to remember successes, because community organizing is not easy work. Fighting for policy change is not easy work, and systems don't change overnight. So if people can remember that things do move, even if they move slowly, or even if you have to keep fighting and it feels like no progress is happening, I think that it will keep them more encouraged to stay in the fight.
Thank you. I'll piggyback on one thing that you said, and I really like it when you said that many of us are in positions that we can pull other people up, and that is really the true nature of this organization. And your husband helped start the networking piece of it in 2013, John McCarty. And it's evolved to give business direct services through the partnership with Heritage Global Group. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, go to legacybusinessleague.org. But when we started the networking group, we made a concerted effort to make sure that people were nominated to receive recognition in ways in which they weren't before in some of the coastal ways in which business leaders were recognized. We made sure that people knew about nominations. We made sure they knew about those leadership applications and that they were represented. And we continue to do that work. And so, and like you said earlier, Mr. Nsombi Lambright Haynes, that you can't always run for office, but you can, if you are in a position, all things being equal, look at an application and make sure that that person is able to interview, and that we're looking at skill sets and making sure that you start a diversity and inclusion initiative at your organization if they don't have one. There's things that you can do that don't have to take away from your life. It doesn't have to be all consuming. It could be those baby steps and just having conversations and allowing people to understand who you are, for that cultural sensitivity and inclusion that we want to people to understand. I'm gonna take that back, because I saw a great quote where a woman shared with me when it was going around the George Floyd, when there was a white woman that said to me, I don't see color. I've raised my kids not to see color. I just don't. I don't see black and white. And the quote, in which I have always believed, is that, well, I want you to see my color. I want you to put yourself in my shoes. I want you to understand the type of things that I go through on a day-to-day that you don't go through. And to say that there is no color and that you don't see it, that is almost an insult, or it's insensitive to my experience. So even if, again, you're not running for office, you're not starting an organization, you can still have conversations so that we can begin to heal, because that is really what I think that will help us move forward in a concerted effort if we begin to be sensitive to one another's lives. So I just want to thank both of you for being here today. I really don't think we could have had better folks talking about the legacy of Dr. King, and to just take a moment. You know, we didn't spend a whole lot of time today, but I hope that you'll share it, and that you'll listen, and take some of the things that have been presented today, and allow it to motivate you and inspire you to act. So till next time. Have a great
Thank you so much.
MLK holiday.
Absolutely. Take care.